All right. Good morning, everyone, and happy St. Patrick's Day. I retrieved my lucky green clover tie this morning that I wear once every year. I'm Rob Clayman. I'm with the Oshkosh Chamber, and we are lucky today to have DOR Secretary Peter Barca with us. And Secretary Barca is going to be providing an economic outlook for the state, and I believe some part of the Oshkosh region. And then we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the federal programs and also some of the state budget priorities. So we're looking forward to that. Thanks for joining us this morning, Secretary Barca. I assume from Madison this morning.
Yes, thank you, Rob. I'm here in our conference room at the Revenue Building. So things are in a fury around here with the new American Recovery Act passing, and the state and Revenue Department have a big role in that. So it's a hopping time around here.
Yeah, it sure is. It sure is. Well, it's keeping everybody busy. That's great. I will. What I'll do is first I'm going to introduce Secretary Barca, and then we're going to hear from Secretary Barca in his presentation, and we'll follow that up with a Q&A from folks listening in. And attendees are able. You can use the Q&A tab, and we'll be monitoring that throughout the morning here. And I want to remind everybody that this is being recorded. So you'll be able to find that on the Oshkosh Chamber website after this meeting. Many folks, we have almost as many people that listen to the presentations after on their schedules than tune in. But we've got a good crew tuning in this morning. We'd like to welcome everybody here. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to introduce Secretary Barca, just read a little bit on his bio. He's certainly got a great background, been around for a while. In fact, I remember I served with your secretary on the first Be Bold task force in Wisconsin, and those were fun times.
Sure was. That's what led to the creation of WEDC, Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, which I had the good fortune of being on their board ever since the beginning.
That's true. You're still on the board of directors at WEDC.
That's great.
Yeah, that's great. So I'll just mention that Secretary Barca was appointed as Secretary of the Wisconsin DOR by Governor Tony Evers in January of 19. Secretary Barca served in the state legislature as representative from the 64th Assembly District from 1985 to 93 and was then elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. He returned to the state legislature in 2009 and served until January of 19. During this time, he spent 7 years as the Assembly Minority Leader. We worked with you on many projects when you were doing that. Following his time in Congress, Secretary Barca served for nearly 5 years as the Midwest Regional Administrator of the SBA during the Clinton administration. He was also appointed to lead the National Regulatory Fairness Program, an initiative aimed at making regulatory enforcement more small business friendly, which we all appreciate that. Secretary Barca later spent nearly a decade as VP and then president of Aurora Associates International, which is an international project management company that conducted international development programs in more than 25 countries. Secretary Barca received his undergraduate degree from UW-Milwaukee, his master's from UW, and then attended graduate school at Harvard University. And as I mentioned, we worked on the first Be Bold task force together, which is creation of WEDC. And I know that, Secretary, you've been historically engaged with economic development, the Wisconsin Economic Development Association, which is our statewide economic development group, and have been very supportive of economic development in Wisconsin over decades. So we really appreciate that and appreciated working with you. So with that, I'd like to welcome you again and appreciate you taking the time to be with us this morning. And I'll turn it over to you, and then we'll follow it up with a Q&A.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Rob. And the Irish are ought to say top of the morning to y'all on this great St. Patty's Day. Right. Telling Rob before we came online, I was a big Jay Leno fan in the day, and he would always talk about Oshkosh, Wisconsin as being one of the top 3 cities in the nation for celebrating St. Patty's Day. So anyway, terrific to be with you on this day. And we have a lot of very important and some very positive, exciting news that I have the good fortune of sharing with you. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on with public health and our vaccine program. I'm going to share some data about what's going on in Winnebago County and Oshkosh specifically. And then I'm going to talk about the governor's budget and some of the initiatives that I think are particularly important for economic growth and entrepreneurship and revving up our economy. We're fortunate that we have, the largest number of economists work in our research and policy division, and they track all the macroeconomic data, so they do a very good job. And it says Kathy Friedel under my name. Kathy heads our Badger unit, which Governor Evers, encouraged us to create, standing for Business Development and Government Relations, so that we'd have a business-friendly approach at the Revenue Department, which is something near and dear to my heart. So anyway, that's just by way of a preview. And to get started, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the vaccine success. And I can't think of anything more important than that, because as our economists track how things are going economically, we see the economy bounce back as the COVID cases decline, and when we have the surge, unfortunately during the fall, the economy receded again. In fact, we've never had in the last 100 years a recession so completely tied to public health, and that's why what we do in terms of the success of the vaccine to allow us to open the economy is just so absolutely vital, as all of you know. And the good news is that Wisconsin is doing exceedingly well. As you can see, and I won't go through all the data, but on the screen you can see that well over 2/3 of people 65 years of age or older in Wisconsin, over 700,000 people, have received at least the first dose of the vaccine. So think about that. That's very important. Over 20% of the population, 1.2 million people, have received their first dose. And you can see, I don't have a chart trending it, but you can see the trend of people getting the vaccine is going up very dramatically. That puts us, frankly, first in the upper Midwestern states in terms of doses administered per 100,000 population. We're at over 25,000 per 100,000 people, which is very vitally important. And Wisconsin's third in the nation in terms of percentage of doses administered. Now, this is very important because we don't completely control the supply, but we're making the most of the supply, with 94% of them as we receive them going into people's arms and helping to protect them from this just awful pandemic that we've all experienced. So this has been one of, Governor Evers' top priorities, has been, he tracks daily. In fact, we had cabinet calls every single day for the first 4 or 5 months of the pandemic. Now we've gone back to once every week or two, but this has been his top priority, and it's going well so far, thankfully. But largely, what he would say if you were here, it's because of our partnerships with the medical clinics, with hospitals, pharmacies across the state. That's just so important, and having that state and local partnership, and we have a partnership with Winnebago County and their public health department, and so many others. And that's what's really that, and the focus the administration has put on this is why we believe that it's been successful. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the Oshkosh-Neenah metropolitan region and some of the economic indicators. I know that would obviously be important to all of you, being from that region. And our economists track this data on a regular basis. As you can guess, obviously employment was extremely hard hit. Much as 13% unemployment in Wisconsin, 11.4% back in the fall in Winnebago County. And that's obviously improved dramatically, although we're still below the pre-pandemic stages. But Winnebago County is faring better than the state. State's still at minus 5.2%, and Winnebago's at 2.7%. So obviously, for the most part, we've been able to recover a little bit faster, which is terrific. Retail sales have increased, so that's been a plus overall. But the hardest hit in this pandemic has been, the hotel industry, restaurant industry, all of those kinds of accommodations that have just been so, just rocked by this pandemic. And as you'll see in an upcoming slide, that's why we put a focus on, as we'll show you in a little bit, on focusing on those hardest hit elements of the economy to direct our CARES money and many of the other state initiatives. New law changes right in the budget. The first bill that passed and that Governor Evers signed into law, Wisconsin Act 1, was a bill that came out of the Department of Revenue. We call it the Taxpayer Enhancement Act. And the whole idea was to try and provide for improvements in for tax administration and helping people to qualify for more tax kinds of breaks. And so, like, for instance, one of the things that was in the governor's budget, very important in terms of entrepreneurship, didn't pass here, but we did pass as part of this, which is to allow the self-employed to deduct their insurance premiums. Very, very important. They were the only ones that couldn't deduct it, and to kind of spur entrepreneurship, which you're probably aware on, as Rob mentioned, at WEDC, the governor created a task force around entrepreneurship to try to come up with new initiatives and ideas to try and spur entrepreneurship. Another point, which I know is important in your region of the state, as it is in many of the urban type areas, is the historic rehabilitation tax credit. And we worked with realtors and developers, and what we found was that if we could allow people to take that tax credit up front versus having to spread it over time, that would spur more of these kinds of projects. As you know, these projects can be risky. Sometimes they find asbestos. You don't always know what you're going to find in these historic buildings. So we worked in partnership with them in order to get this passed as part of this package. Another element was the federal government allowed for a double benefit. And this is the first time ever, the feds or the state of Wisconsin have allowed for this kind of double benefit, because normally if you get a grant of money from the federal or state government, well, then you can't use that grant to deduct your expenses because it was free money, so to speak. But because of the pandemic and the nature of it and how hard hit the business community has been, the governor decided to support this double benefit on this one-time basis to help businesses with their recovery. And similarly, the governor was able to persuade the legislature to add in the earned income tax credit. As I'm sure all of you are aware, the earned income tax credit are for people that work every day. They go to work 52 weeks a year, but still are in poverty. So it allows people to get a credit. And what the feds did, which we've now adopted, is we allow people to use either their 19 or their 20 income, whichever puts them in a better tax position. And at the Department of Revenue, we're even going so far, if they make the wrong selection, we're letting them know so that we can put them in a better tax position. So we could be proactive about it. And then finally, the CARES Act money that we had here in Wisconsin, as I'll show you in an upcoming slide, was all laser focused for restaurants, for any businesses that were hard hit. The Wisconsin Farm Support Program. We wanted to make sure, even though the IRS will not allow you to deduct that, in Wisconsin we do allow it, because we know those businesses especially need that help. CARES grant money, as you can see, the governor dedicated over $300 million of the money that we got from the federal government to serve during the pandemic. Of course, a lot went for public health, for setting up vaccination centers and contact tracing and things of that sort. But over $300 million went directly into the hardest hit industries like restaurants, lodging grants, We're All In, which retailers largely qualified for, and Wisconsin Farm Support Program. And it's been a success. We've been able to track economically, that many businesses have, been able to sustain themselves due to not only this though, but obviously the funds on a federal level from the SBA, which were even more important. Now for a budget overview, the governor's budget largely reflects his goal to have a Badger bounce back better. His goal is to make sure that the economy is stronger at the end of the pandemic than it was pre-pandemic. Now that's a tall order because we were in pretty good shape going into the pandemic, but we believe through strategic investments in small business, workforce, the education system, infrastructure, ag, and these other priorities, that will enable us to have that kind of success. And that's what our economists have recommended as well. So starting with small business and entrepreneurs, here's some of the key items that are in the budget that if you can see the benefit there, I would recommend you talk with your legislators, because obviously not everything will pass, but those things that are most important to your local economy and your businesses, you're going to want to let them know about. Probably one of the more important ones is to create a $200 million fund of state funds to assist small businesses who have been affected during the pandemic to retain and rehire their employees. We know that, we hope the pandemic's only, 3 or 4 months away, and know how hard it is to keep workforce when they're not getting the hours they normally do. So this is directed towards that. Next, to invest in our state's entrepreneurs, and this is near and dear to my heart, because actually Governor Walker had asked me to serve on a venture capital fund back during his administration, which Mark Buer, who you might remember, heads the research park, led to UW-Madison, but he had been in the Tommy Thompson administration. And we recommended a $100 million venture capital fund because we know Wisconsin is always lagged behind in terms of this fund. Unfortunately, Governor Walker at that time could only get support for $25 million, but having $100 million hits that sweet spot so that it can become an evergreen fund, so that we can make sure that long term we'll have more venture capital available for entrepreneurs here in Wisconsin. Next, I told you already about the insurance deduction he had in his budget, but fortunately that passed as part of the taxpayer enhancement package. And then fourth, an $8 million, which will be near and dear to Rob's heart, for awards to local and regional economic development organizations, because we know that many times for smaller businesses, you can act a little bit more nimbly and focus in on the local needs in your local economy. And so the governor certainly supports having, us provide support to regional economic development groups as well. Then in terms of some other key economic initiatives, $20 million to support training for businesses that were affected by the pandemic. As we all know, pre-pandemic, what our economists told us is the biggest issue facing businesses was workforce issues and being able to find enough workers to supply manufacturers and others. And our economists tell us in the next year or two, we're going to go back to the same issue all over again. So the governor would like to tackle that now. And also to get like $8 million for local workforce development boards to help you all within your own locality and region on initiatives that will help you to build up that workforce for when, we're certainly going to go back into the same circumstances we were. Increased funding for buy local, buy Wisconsin type programs so that we keep our money at home as much as we can. And then the last item in this section is also near and dear to my heart, because when Governor Evers put together his first budget a couple of weeks ahead of time, we had 8 of the 12 largest companies flew into Madison to meet with me here at the Revenue Building. And they indicated that one of the most significant things we could do to help our economy be to increase our research and development credit. Wisconsin's kind of in the middle of the pack. We're not too bad, but we're not the greatest in providing a 10% R&D credit. The governor proposed last budget to double it to 20%, which would put us in the elite level among states around the country. It did not pass last session, so we're going to try that again. And what I heard from business leaders is if they do their research and development here in Wisconsin, they're much more likely to keep the jobs here. So very important for economic development, very important, but not just for large businesses. I have a good friend who owns a manufacturing company in Racine, and he does a lot of research and development, and as many companies do. And this really helps them to finance, because it's a refundable credit, that research and development that they're undertaking. And obviously the governor, being a former superintendent of schools, believes strongly in the importance of research and development. A few other items, and I won't go through each one of these, but just to give you an idea, with WDC, the governor provides $10 million in each year of the biennium for our annual block grant program. That's very important because as special projects come up and they approach WDC, we're able to have some funds to be able to make sure we're supporting local investments as well. And so it's an important fund. Another issue is $10 million to deal with underserved communities and businesses. And then, again, on the workforce side, continued and increased investments in things like apprenticeship, project search, and green energy jobs. Broadband, as we all know, in the rural parts of Wisconsin, there's nothing more important. And last year, in the governor's budget and with the legislature on a bipartisan basis approved the largest investment ever in broadband at $54 million. Well, the governor would nearly quadruple that to over $200 million in this biennium, which will really advance us exponentially. And of course, in the information age, there's very little that's more important than making sure that people have coverage. And we've seen in the pandemic just how vital it is, whether it be for school children or be important for businesses, and increasingly businesses selling things in the internet marketplace. Very important in that regard. And this is one that legislative leaders on both sides of the aisle have indicated that they plan to support this. So this one you probably don't have to lobby as hard on, because they've already recognized the importance of this, which I'm very heartened by. Higher education, of course, in your region, having UW Oshkosh here, which does a tremendous job in a number of key areas. This investment of funds is just vitally important. The governor would continue the tuition fee freeze, but he would fund the freeze, which is important for maintaining the quality of our UW system. I know former Governor Tommy Thompson has heralded this investment that Governor Evers is calling for. This is one that if you support, you really do need to lobby on, because over the last 10 to 20 years, we really kind of retrenched on our state commitment in support of the UW system and the various cluster campuses. And it's one of the greatest assets we have. It distinguishes Wisconsin because of one of the greatest systems in the country, if not in the world. So very important item. A lot of the collaborative research that they have ongoing today makes a difference also with business and industry. I know the Fox Valley, even like things like paper, the paper industry, a lot of collaborative research on that front, but in many areas as well, like healthcare and things of that sort. Governor would also, being a former Board of Regent on the Technical College Board, makes a major investment of $36 million to assist the technical college, which we know is, goes without even saying how important it is for workforce development. Few other strategic investments which are important for economic prosperity. One, obviously, is the Transportation Aids Program to help local governments to keep up with their investment in infrastructure, which has been crumbling. I know President Biden has indicated that's one of his next big priorities that hopefully there can be bipartisan support for. My experience in the legislature and in the Congress. In fact, I served with your former Congressman, Tim Petri, who was, one of the champions, of course, on the Transportation Committee, and it was always bipartisan, the support for infrastructure in the Congress. $75 million fund for local intermodal and multimodal transportation projects, which I know is very important in your region of the state. $162 million for the state's highway program, and then money for wetland prevention and helping farmers when crops are damaged, which is important for our ag industry. Healthcare. These are two very important provisions. One is telehealth. We have seen during this pandemic how vitally helpful it can be to have telehealth as one option for providing healthcare services. But it's also important in terms of various specialty fields like psychiatry and other fields where we just do not have enough specialists. So that's an important strategic investment the governor would make. And then another one, which is uphill, I'll be very frank, is the Badger Care expansion. It shouldn't be as uphill anymore, because just in the last 2 years since the governor proposed this expansion, another half dozen states have taken the federal funds. And all this really is about is taking the funds the federal government provides, and think about if we had another over $600 million, what a benefit that would be to our economy to put more funds in strategic investments such as the UW system or workforce or economic development such as WEDC, things of that sort. Even some of that money could be directed towards further tax savings for that matter. But right now we're paying 100% of the freight. So we have Badger Care, but our taxpayers pay 100%. So we're subsidizing every other state, all the other 38 states in the nation who have taken the funds. Every state around us took the funds. I call this the biggest mistake in a generation. As you think about it, we've now turned down close to $2 billion. So one of those things that I just can't think of something more important, both in terms of healthcare outcomes, but also financially. Other key investments, we talked about workforce, and this is a very important one I know in so many regions around the state, and that's workforce housing. I've heard from so many company presidents that they wanted to expand their production and they wanted to hire more workers, but to get people to move into an area, if they can't afford housing, they're not going to move there. And it's prevented some companies from actually even doing expansions in Wisconsin. So this would be a very important one to provide grants directly to municipalities to help to provide more workforce housing. There's also funds in there, $5 million for WHEDA, W-H-E-D-A, to support this initiative as well. In addition to that, there's funds for supporting flood proofing, investments in local roads, and then for remediation of PFAS, which I'm sure you all are aware has hurt our groundwater and actually even hurt the quality of our crops. So a very important investment. Just the last slide I have, just a word on the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. Obviously, the federal government made a $1.9 trillion investment. And you can see where a lot of that money would go, $10 billion to reauthorize the state small business credit, $7.25 billion for a paycheck protection program, $28 billion just for restaurants alone, which we know are at risk of closing permanently, $3 billion for the Commerce Department. So you can just see how important many of these strategic investments are. We're working overtime right now, looking at those funds coming in and making sure that we can get money out that we have control of, just like many of the stimulus grants have gone out. It's obviously been very popular amongst people because I think people recognize that to truly have a big bounce back and these kinds of key investments are vital. So Rob, that completes my presentation, and I certainly would be happy to answer any questions that anybody has. But I hope you will support many of these budget initiatives that we know will help our economy and help local businesses and entrepreneurship. And obviously, trying to make sure that we're getting vaccines out is very important in terms also of helping the pandemic. So with that, Rob.
That's great. Thanks, Secretary. Certainly a lot going on in the state right now, and not to mention the pandemic, but certainly a lot of just the normal things that you have to do to keep things going. So we appreciate that. I want to remind folks that they can submit questions now. View the Q&A. I've got a couple coming in. I think Secretary, and I had a couple on the pre-event basis. I'll share a couple of those, and then we can go from there. So we had one from a local accountant, and basically said that ask Secretary Barker if the state is going along with the latest set of IRS tax law changes, mainly the non-taxable portion of the Wisconsin unemployment payments. And so they've been silent as to whether they too will not tax the first 10,200 of unemployment. And it's March 17th. How do we think we can, possible to get all the returns completed if they'll not make a decision? There's another question, but I'll let you go with that one first.
Yeah, let me answer that. And obviously there's been discussions between legislators and the governor. I think the answer, plain and simple, is we're not going to be able to get that done fast enough for this filing. So if in fact that change is made, people end up having to file amended returns because we're putting out guidance today, in terms of, Wisconsin does already exclude a portion of UI benefits, and it'd be nice to harmonize with the feds. But as you indicate, it's March 17th. We've got less than a month left. Even if the legislature would pass it today, which the bill isn't even drafted, by the time it worked its way through committees in both houses and the governor signed it, we'd already be April 15th. So I think that it's something that I know the governor is very interested in, and he's been talking with legislators about how we can provide greater support. but it's one of those things that will not make it. We had to really rush with the double benefit on the PPP to get that done in time. And I know you're all racing against the clock. So the only way I could see it happening would be if the IRS were to extend the timeline for filing again. And of course, even that's questionable because we're getting so close now. But I know quite a number of members of Congress have reached out to the IRS commissioner asking them to consider that. So, but absent that, it couldn't happen for this tax filing season.
Yeah. All right. And that was our other question. Is there any consideration to extending the April 15th deadline? But, that's obviously going to come down from the federal level. So.
Yes, we harmonize with the federal government anytime that there's a declared emergency. I know the legislature is looking to pick up a bill to just say we automatically do it anytime they extend it, whether there's a declared emergency or not. But there is still obviously, the pandemic. We would harmonize immediately if they were to extend it.
All right. Let's see. Yeah, we've got a lot of them coming in. I'll a couple here. How do we avoid duplication of program benefits with funding from the state budget, COVID CARES Act money, American Rescue Plan money for the state, and the ARP money to counties and cities? An example, we currently have multiple RLF programs that overlap.
Well, absolutely. And it is tricky. I mean, obviously due to the nature of the pandemic, Congress has acted on 3 different occasions to provide support funds. The state has acted on a couple occasions. And so we're going to do our best as an administration and obviously the legislature and administration together in terms of this budget and looking at what is, what are the implications in terms of the federal act so that we can fill in the gaps, but not duplicate what they're doing. So it'll be something that we're talking about really every single day in terms of trying to do our best to make sure that we're using our funds wisely and not replicating efforts. So we'll do the best we can in that.
All right, great, thanks. Also says, are we able to use any of the $3 billion of American Rescue Plan state money to help pay for selective UW system capital improvements, related? When will the governor decide how to spend that?
Right. I'm as far as I know, I don't believe we can, although, we're still dissecting the various programs that are there. And we're waiting for guidance from agencies. Like even for us, the Department of Revenue, we're waiting for the Treasury Department to give us guidance, even in terms of our tax law changes, because there's a provision there that you can't use the money to give a tax break. So then the question becomes, can we use, as our economy improves though, can we use that in order to make that change? So even going back to the previous question about harmonizing with the feds on UI, and I'm on the board of the federal tax administrators, and we work very closely in the FTA with the IRS, and it's not clear to us at this point if we even can do that without suffering some type of penalty. So we're waiting for IRS guidance on that. So many of these programs, it's just not entirely clear. So we're waiting for each of these federal agencies to issue guidance, whether it's DOT through transportation funds or whether it's the Federal Department of Commerce and some of these economic development initiatives. So we will be getting out information as it comes in, and Kathy does a nice job on our website. I really would ask you all to take a look at our badger. If you go to the Wisconsin Department of Revenue, you Google that and put in BDGR, and it'll take you to our site. And we try to keep that updated and work with the other agencies. So there's links to DWD and DOA, but that's a good source to get information.
All right, that's great. See, another one says, do you have any comments? This one's a little more pointed. Do you have any comments on all the money spent on the rescue bill just passed that has nothing to do with COVID relief? Why did all the fat go into this bill for relief?
Well, unfortunately, the only thing I can tell you is, Congress never seems to have the discipline to, even on when you have a federally declared disaster like a hurricane that comes through, Congress inevitably always adds, some provisions, and which I think is unfortunate. I think it's better if it comes as a separate bill, but as we all know, there's a certain level of dysfunction on the part of Congress right now where they just don't pass enough bills. When I was in Congress, at least you would pass the 13 appropriation bills. You wouldn't always get them all done, but you get most of them done. Now, many times it just goes into an omnibus budget bill. And, so I could go on and on, obviously, especially being a former member of Congress. It's very frustrating to me, much of the dysfunction that goes on there. And so I can only tell you that every single bill that passes, they add these unrelated provisions.
My guess is you're happy to be the Secretary of DOR in the state of Wisconsin right now versus being out in DC.
I have to say, I enjoy my position. When you're part of an administration, as I was on the federal level as well, you have a certain amount of ability to, fashion guidance and rules to help people. And really, I have to thank the legislature. And on a bipartisan basis, I have a very positive relationship with Chairman Mako from Green Bay and the ranking member, Tip McGuire, and then Chairman Kuyanga and Chairman Markline and ranking member Ringhan and Smith. The one thing I have to say I'm very proud of is we pass every one of our bills on strong bipartisan basis, nearly unanimously. We've got a bill coming up on unclaimed property to make it easier for, to claim this unclaimed property for people, and it passed unanimously through the Assembly last year. But when the Senate didn't come back, it got stalled. So now we're looking to bring that forward again. So, we try our best to make it bipartisan when it comes to revenue issues.
Yeah, right. The next one really deals with the manufacturing and ag tax credit. They asked you to speak to it.
Sure.
The governor's proposing, the $300,000 limit on the credit. It's really been a valuable tool from our perspective in economic development. And really at a time when TIF is always under constant attack, which we know, limited tools in our toolbox. So on the surface, to me, it seems like this makes us less competitive as a state. Can you kind of speak to that and maybe why that's a good idea for Wisconsin to kind of limit that on some of our largest employers and job creators?
Well, I think, the governor views it as a tax equity issue to some degree. I look down the road here to Epic, which is, one of the companies that's done the most and the brain drain here in Wisconsin. Well, they pay taxes on the first dollar of profit that they make. And so I think the governor feels like if we give the first $300,000 where you're not paying a nickel of taxes, that as you, bring in more profits, you ought to be able to at least help support the economy on some level. And I'll tell you, when I had in this very room 2 years ago, 9 of the 12 largest businesses represented here, and they wanted the governor to double the research and development tax credit. I asked them, I said, well, look, we have to fund these things. What's more important to you, having this type of a credit or limiting, or being able to limit to some degree the manufacturing credit? And they uniformly all said we would prefer the research and development credit. So, the revenue has to come from somewhere. That does cost significant funds. And I think the governor also feels on an equity standpoint that if we let people, not pay a nickel of taxes on those first $300,000, that we've gone a long way. And, and from an equity standpoint, small businesses, if you own a retail business or you own a restaurant or you own a biotech business, you're paying on $1. So that's the way you use it. And it still would make us be one of the top states in the country, incidentally.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. I know WIDA will certainly probably be weighing in on this one. You kind of know where WIDA will probably be at, but
Sure.
I want to protect it. It's an efficient tax. The MAC credit is, it's automatic. So a lot of these other tax credits, they're great programs and we do utilize them. But there's some red tape associated with that, whereas the MAC credit, it's pretty, it's very efficient and effective. So
yeah, I don't deny that. And, the governor certainly wants to maintain it. He just thinks it can be, trimmed back somewhat.
Yep. All right.
And, and think about this at $300,000. I mean, for small manufacturing companies, that probably will cover them their entire, profit for the year. So
it will. Certainly will. And it's more on the higher end, right. So here's a question coming in regarding the Medicaid money. Are there any valid reasons to turn down the Medicaid money? How can we convince our legislators to accept the $630 million?
Well, personally, I don't think there's any valid reasons. Now Now, Speaker Voss is a good friend of mine. I mean, outside of work, we get together every month or two, and I'll give you what his argument would be. And we used to joke we could give each other speeches because as a minority leader, we hear each other speak a lot. So I think I'm being fair to his position. His argument is that he thinks it's better if people are in the private marketplace versus taking Badger Care funds. And there's no doubt for people that can afford it, I would actually agree with them. But for many low-income people that are getting the earned income tax credit, they simply can't afford the deductibles and the co-pays. So many times they end up going without insurance. If they're going without insurance, that means that they're going to the emergency room for their care. And then that adds cost to private insurance anyway. So, look, what you could do if you don't like it. And so when they talk about this budget expands welfare, that's what they mean, because they call it welfare if people go on to Badger Care. I don't consider that welfare, quite frankly. I consider that just, a state-supported type of health insurance fund. But you could limit the number and say, we're not going to accept anybody else, but at least for those people that are already on Badger Care, instead of us as state taxpayers paying 100% of the freight and subsidizing 38 other states, why not at least take that 80% funding? Now, I understood, even though I didn't agree with Governor Walker's point, that, well, the feds might do this and then they might take away the money. Of course, we don't argue that with transportation, but at least I could understand where he was coming from to some degree. But here we are a decade later, this program hasn't ended. And I can assure you, President Biden is not going to end this program in the next 4 years. So we're talking about $1.2 billion in the next 4 years in federal support we could bring in. So to be perfectly frank, and I'd say the same thing we could have a vibrant debate here with Speaker Voss, my friend, were in the room, but I don't see any reason whatsoever, even if you want to limit the numbers at least, that you wouldn't take those federal funds. I just personally can't see any reason. And in fact, I go further, because what I would say, and I truly believe it, that this was the worst mistake in a generation here in Wisconsin, because even if you don't care about health outcomes, which clearly will be better if people are on Badger Care, because then you cover more people, and you also avoid, as I've always said, we already have universal health care. It's called the emergency room, and it's the most expensive and inefficient way to deliver health care. So I just think it's just such a big mistake not to take that 80% federal funding, especially when you see in the last couple of years, 6 other states have joined in the program. So pretty soon we're going to be one of the last handful of states that are left. We already are one of only 12 states. You can tell I have strong feelings on this.
Yeah, how do you feel about that? That's great. Well, hopefully, cooler heads can prevail and y'all can get together and come to terms on that, because certainly that's money.
Yeah, as I said, Rob, I think there's a compromise to be had there. You could limit the number. I personally don't think that's a good idea, but I'd rather have that, at least take the 80% federal funds for those we're already covering anyway, than to leave that money on the table.
Right. All right, we have another question here from Jim. It says, can more information be provided on the additional $7.25 billion in PPP? Who is eligible for this, and how is it being distributed?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have some information on our website now, and we will update it just as soon as we have more information. So again, if you just Google Wisconsin Department of Revenue and go to our Badger link, which is easy to find. In fact, we should probably, Kathy, as long as you're on, we should add a slide on that for next time so you can see it. But we have information on there, and coming from the Small Business Administration, frankly, like I've reached out to some of the attorneys that I work with over there and have been able to provide some information to some private businesses. So if you're truly stuck, what I would say is, if you want to call our customer service line, we'll try to be helpful to you. And let me just put in a plug there. I have to say one thing I'm very proud of, and you don't ever have to hesitate calling the Wisconsin Department of Revenue, because the longest hold time we have is 3 minutes. And we do a survey after every call that comes in. We tape record every call to make sure our people are treating taxpayers with respect. And we get a 98.9% rating of our personnel in terms of whether they're professional and helpful and knowledgeable in helping the taxpayers of this state. So it's something we put a big emphasis on. And so don't ever hesitate to call us if you have a question.
That's great. That's great. And, I'll mention the PPP. It's been certainly a game changer for a lot of our businesses and local businesses around the state. The one recent change where they've allowed sole proprietors to utilize now their gross income level versus adjusted is very helpful. The only problem with it is that the folks that had already submitted under, their adjusted income level, they can't go back and readjust or amend that application. But in other words, it's still good news for sole proprietors that you can use your gross number.
Right. Good point. Thank you very much, Rob, for bringing that up.
Yeah. And one more question here coming in from, we've got two more actually, but this one is, what type of affordable housing projects will qualify for funding? And in what way will this money pass from local municipalities to the end project? And I know that Oshkosh has an example, and the funding is 21 million coming. So that's a significant amount of money.
Right. And actually there's a fund created in order to accomplish this through the Department of Administration, and they're putting together guidelines now. We just checked last week. They're not quite ready to release those yet, but they will be in the coming weeks. So we'll put something on our website as soon as that's available as well. But the whole intent is to try to help local communities be able to fund these workforce development. And I know I talked with our executive director, Joaquin Altura, who heads WHEDA, WHEDA, and they have their own program too. And so that's another source that you should reach out to. But the two agencies that will be handling this is WHEDA and then DOA.
That's great. There was a CRA survey done around a number of regions in the state, and recently the results came out from that. And one of the largest issues facing our local communities, regions, it's two things really: is workforce housing and broadband. So, and you've addressed both of those today. Those seem to be pretty much bipartisan, and from a support perspective, I think people are realizing that they're both very important issues for us.
Right. Oh, terrific.
One final question was: do you think, did Wisconsin get a fair share of the American Rescue Plan Act? I mean, are we in the game?
Oh, I think we are. With the CARES Act, we did extremely well, as I was able to show you. And the other thing I want to say is all of our information is very transparent. Like if you go look at the We're All In grant, you can find out exactly where the money went. We administered, in fact, both the We're All In Phase 2 Act, the Restaurant Act, the Wisconsin Farm Support Program here at the Department of Revenue. And just because we had the tax records, we actually literally would just put money in people's accounts, so that they would get it electronically just the minute it was available. So we're in a very strong position. We also have signed an MOU with the Department of Workforce Development to share records. So we're working overtime to make sure that we're well positioned to be able to capture those funds and get it out just as quickly as we can to those that we know, very much need it. And I know the governor, for instance, lobbied very hard to get more vaccines for Wisconsin. That's why one of the reasons we're doing very well. And I know that all of the cabinet secretaries, we talk every couple of weeks about ways we can reach out to our respective federal departments in order to make sure we're aware of every dollar that might be available, because we just want to make sure we have that Badger bounce back in the strongest way possible.
Great. Thanks for that. One other one came in here on the Act 10 repeal potential. And we couldn't get away without that one.
Sure.
How would the repeal impact the local school tax levy, municipal budgets, et cetera? Some people think this would be a disaster for local units of government and school districts. What's your comments on that?
Well, the governor would not. The governor would keep in that people still have to contribute to their health care and contribute to their pension plan. He's not looking to change that at all. But let me share one element of this, because being in the legislature during the period that every company can relate to. Think about this provision. In order to even certify to have a union any longer, you have to get 51%, not of those that vote, but those that are eligible to vote. Now, there wouldn't be one public official that would be elected if they had to get 51% of those eligible versus those casting a vote. But also, I've been on the board of directors of a number of companies. There's no standard there. We have to have 51% of those eligible. Think about, we all get those proxy votes in the mail if we're stockholders, and some mail them in, some don't mail them in. I know from being on boards that, You don't get many of them, but think about it. You couldn't even act as a corporation if you had to get 51% of those that are eligible versus those that actually choose to cast their ballots. It's a very unfair provision. And the governor, again, this governor is a former superintendent of schools. He's not a politician. He just believes in basic fairness. And he thinks that provision is just, it's just out of line. And I don't know how anybody can disagree with him. I actually went and spoke to the WMC about 2 years after this passed and spoke to their board and their boardroom. They're all 54 board members there. And nobody disagreed with me at that time, at least when I brought this up, that this is an unfair standard.
All right. Well, and kind of going in line with that, any insight into the budget proposal for the $1.6 billion for new spending on public-private schools? And that was
well, yeah, very, very important. I mean, what the governor wants to attain is what Governor Tommy Thompson had put in place when he was governor, which is 2/3 support for public education. And the reason why this is so important is that there's just too much of a burden on property taxpayers. And, I think very few people object to paying property taxes to get their garbage picked up, to, have their roads paved in front of their house, for public safety, to have police and fire to protect them. I've never heard anybody complain about that. But when you're on a fixed income, and even for many businesses, I think people feel like, why should we have to pay such high a property tax to support things that have nothing to do with property? So part of the reason why there's a big investment there is to take the 2/3 funding for education off the property taxes. And then the other issue is special education, something near and dear to my heart. Early in my career, I directed a camp for kids with disabilities. And we used to have a standard in this state that I fought for when I was first elected back in the late 80s, that the state would pay for 63% of special education funding. I left the legislature, as you mentioned. I was in the Congress. I was in private business. I ran my own company. I came back, and lo and behold, now we fund 21% of special education. So think of that, almost 80% comes out of property taxpayers' base. And so that's part of what the governor wants to attain, as well as, there's no question, being a former superintendent, he wants to have quality education, and he's big into linking education to workforce training and to have, that smooth transition. And that's just very vital in terms of meeting our future workforce needs.
Great.
In fact, in the interest of full disclosure, my brother-in-law is a deputy superintendent of schools there, Dave Gunlock in Oshkosh. And my mother-in-law had a farm out in Friendship between Fond du Lac and Oshkosh. So I'm up in your region a lot. It's near and dear to my heart.
That's great. We know Dr. Gunlock well. He's very active, very involved in many of our programs here.
Right. So I'm just pleased to be with you, Rob. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And don't ever hesitate to call upon us if we can be helpful individually, your businesses, or collectively. Happy to come back after the budget passes, or whenever you think it's helpful to get more information. So we truly appreciate the work of the chamber and your Economic Development Association. We know you're the ones that support all the civic developments that go on, and as well as things like the Girl Scouts and the Little Leagues, and you're what make your community really thrive. So we appreciate your leadership, both regionally and in terms of our state.
Well, thanks for that, Secretary. And again, we appreciate you being with us today. We're at the top of the hour, and appreciate a lot of information. Hopefully we can get a copy of the PowerPoint. We can put that up and share it with our attendees, but a lot of great information today, and we appreciate you being with us.
Thank you. We'll make sure we share that. All the best.
Great.
Have a great St. Patrick's Day.